Julian Hayes extended his hand across the table, a simple, courteous gesture. Madeline Pierce barely looked at it. Her lips curled into something between amusement and disgust. "I do not shake hands with employees," she said coldly, her voice slicing through the silence. Around the table, 5 executives sat stiffly, watching with thin smiles that said too much and nothing at all. No one moved to speak. No one objected. Julian did not flinch. He let his hand remain there for a second longer, deliberately, before lowering it with quiet grace. The room stayed hushed. His expression remained unreadable. But as he adjusted the sleek watch on his wrist, something shifted. Not in him, but around him. Madeline mistook that silence for submission. "You're the consultant from Hayes Group?" she asked, stressing the word like an insult. "Let's keep this quick. People like me have tight schedules." Julian offered nothing in return. Not a protest, not a correction, just a calm nod. What no one in that boardroom realized yet was that they had already failed the most important evaluation of their lives, and the man they had just dismissed as irrelevant, he was holding the pen that could either sign their future or erase it. The lobby of Ashton and Pierce was cold in more ways than one. Sleek marble floors stretched toward an oversized reception desk manned by a woman too preoccupied with her reflection to notice the man standing patiently in front of her. Julian Hayes wore a simple navy blazer, tailored but unassuming. No luxury. Watch on display, no assistant trailing behind. Just him. Alone. "I believe I am expected," he said gently. The receptionist did not even lift her eyes. "Take a seat. Someone will call you." 40 minutes passed. Not a single glance was spared in his direction. 2 security guards made slow, deliberate rounds, each pass ending in a lingering stare, as though he were trespassing on something sacred. Julian said nothing. But the seconds did not go unnoticed that he mentally logged each one. This was not unfamiliar. Years earlier, he had stood outside a conference room on Wall Street, waiting for an opportunity that never came. A junior analyst then, barely 24, he had watched 3 of his white colleagues, less prepared, less capable, get ushered into the room ahead of him. He had written the pitch deck, but they were the ones who got to present it. He remembered every face that looked past him, every voice that spoke around him, every meeting where his ideas were praised until someone else claimed them. IT had started even before that. 18. He took the subway daily to a brokerage internship on the south side of Chicago. There, he watched wealthy clients speak to black employees as if they were invisible. One summer afternoon, a portfolio manager spilled coffee on Julian's notes, laughed, and told him to start over if you were serious about this industry. He had started over, again and again. While others went home after work, Julian studied 12, sometimes 14 hours. Not because he had something to prove, but because he knew the cost of being underestimated. By 28, he had memorized market patterns the way poets memorize stanzas. While competitors tracked trends, Julian predicted them. He launched Hayes Capital from a single rented office with 1 intern, no outside funding, and a fire that no one else could see, but that he could feel burning in his chest. Now, 16 years later, Hayes Capital managed assets that eclipsed the GDPs of small countries. His strategies were cited in financial journals. His intuition for risk had saved companies from collapse. And yet, this morning, a receptionist at Ashton and Pierce had told him to take a seat without ever asking for his name. Outside the lobby window, traffic buzzed through downtown. Inside, the clock ticked. But Julian did not shift in his chair. He had waited in worse places. And this, like everything else in his life, was a test, not of his patience, but of theirs. In another corner of the lobby, 2 junior executives had passed by and glanced at him. One whispered, "Is he here for IT?" The other shrugged. "Or, a vendor maybe. Maintenance." Julian looked at neither of them. This was not about ego. He did not need their respect, but he would take their attention, on his terms. Upstairs, the boardroom was being prepped for a presentation that would determine the future of Ashton and Pierce. What no one there realized was that their most important audience was sitting in the lobby, cataloging every moment, measuring not their numbers, but their character. Hayes Capital was prepared to invest $4 billion into this firm, but only if its leaders passed a test they did not know they were taking. Julian's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Benton, his chief strategist. "Everything's set. Media teams on standby. Phase 1 begins when you walk in. He stood slowly and made his way toward the elevators. As the silver doors closed in front of him, Julian caught his own reflection for a split second. There was no anger in his eyes. Just clarity. He was not here for revenge. He was here for truth. And truth, once exposed, does not ask for permission. Back in the boardroom, Madeline Pierce stood at the head of the long glass table, her gold laser pointer moving confidently across a series of glowing slides. As you can see, she said, clicking to the next chart, our revenue has exceeded projections by over 14% in the last quarter. That puts us ahead of our competitors in nearly every sector. The executives nodded, a few offering polite applause. Julian Hayes said nothing. His eyes moved across the numbers. His hands rested gently in his lap. Madeline noticed his silence. Is there a problem, Mr. Hayes? She asked, barely disguising her smirk. Julian looked up, his tone as calm as ever. Only one. He leaned forward just slightly. Those numbers do not match the reports you submitted to the SEC last month. According to those filings, your revenue is actually down by 2.3%. The room froze for a moment. Then came the laughter. Soft at first, then sharper from James Dalton, the firm's head of operations. Oh, come on, Dalton chuckled, shaking his head. He probably saw some outdated report online. This is why we do not waste our time with external consultants. Julian did not laugh. He reached into his briefcase and placed a thin folder on the table. This is the quarterly report from your Ohio plant, filed directly with the Department of Energy. Energy usage was down by 18%. That suggests your production was also down, not up. Dalton's smile faded slightly. Madeline raised her eyebrows, clearly irritated. And you are qualified to make these kinds of assumptions? She asked, folding her arms. This is a multi-billion-dollar operation. Do you truly believe you understand it better than the people who run it every day? Julian gave the smallest of smiles. That is not an assumption, Ms. Pierce. It is simple math. He tapped the folder once. And public data. One of the junior executives, Clara Reynolds, flipped through the folder quickly, her face turning pale. He is right, she whispered. This does not match the slides. Madeline's tone sharpened. I do not appreciate being interrupted by someone who does not know how things work here. Our team has been leading this firm for over a decade. We are professionals. Julian's phone vibrated gently in his pocket. He did not even glance at it. He already knew what it meant. He calmly reached for his glass of water and took a sip. I do not doubt your experience, he said, placing the glass down. But experience should not be used to hide bad habits. The words hit like quiet thunder. James Dalton pushed his chair back and stood up. This is getting ridiculous. You were invited here to observe, not to question our methods. If this continues, we will cut the meeting short. Julian stood too, slowly, with purpose. I was not invited here, he said quietly. I chose to be here. Then he looked directly at Madeline. Because I needed to see, for myself, how you lead this company when no one is watching. A strange tension filled the room. The executives shifted uncomfortably. A few glanced toward the door as if unsure whether they were still in control of the meeting or if something had quietly slipped from their hands. Madeline tried to laugh, but it came out too forced. This is absurd. Do you even know who owns the investment firm backing this audit? Julian smiled again, but it was different this time. Not amused, not passive, confident. No, he replied. But you will. This was the moment. The tone had shifted. The smiles had faded. Madeline Pierce had spent the last 40 minutes talking down to a man she believed was beneath her. Now, he stood calmly, correcting her financial data, quoting public records, and watching her own team question her numbers. And still, she did not know who she was speaking to. But the viewers knew, and the feeling in the air made one thing very clear. Julian Hayes was not what he seemed. In this meeting, it had just started, becoming a reckoning. Madeline leaned forward, her voice laced with venomous calm. You come in here, dressed like you walked out of a budget seminar, challenging my numbers. She let out a dry chuckle and folded her arms. You must be braver than you look, or more foolish. Julian stood steady, unshaken. He did not flinch, nor did he raise his voice. His hand drifted toward his second folder. There is a line item in your third quarter expense report labeled Research Allocation, Meridian Phase 2. It accounts for $46 million. However, based on the permits your engineering team filed with the Environmental Board, there has been no physical work done on Phase 2 since March. He placed the folder on the table. That funding went somewhere else. For a few seconds, no one moved. One of the legal associates at the far end of the room reached for the document, flipping through the pages quickly. Her brow furrowed. Then her lips parted slightly. She glanced up at Madeline but said nothing. Julian continued, his voice calm. Reallocating operational losses under a research label is a temporary fix. It keeps your burn rate off radar, but it will raise red flags during the next compliance audit. He paused. That is, if it has not already. Madeline's face twitched for the first time. Behind her mask of cold authority, something had cracked. Across the table, James Dalton spoke up, this time slower. That figure is not public. His eyes narrowed. Where did you get those internal breakdowns? Julian's answer was gentle. Good investors do not just look at what is handed to them. They look at what has been deliberately hidden. As tension rose inside the room, a parallel operation unfolded 6 blocks away. Inside Hayes Capital's New York headquarters, Marcus Taylor sat in front of 6 monitors, his focus razor sharp. He was Julian's second in command, an analyst once overlooked by every major firm until Julian saw in him what no one else bothered to see. Talent, precision, loyalty. Marcus moved between data dashboards and encrypted messages, tracking Sterling Dynamics' digital footprint and flagging patterns. He was running Phase 2, feeding evidence to compliance officers, forwarding anonymous tips to regulatory boards, and preparing the public side of what would soon become a scandal. 8 years ago, Julian had met Marcus at a hedge fund conference. Marcus had just been publicly embarrassed by a senior partner who laughed off his market prediction in front of a crowd. Afterward, Julian approached him with only one sentence. Come work with me. We build things they cannot touch. Since that day, the two had operated like clockwork. One in the light, one in the shadows. Back in the boardroom, Madeline adjusted her blazer, trying to recover her control. Fine, she said with tight lips. You found a line that needs clarification. It does not mean you understand this company. Julian walked slowly to the projector screen and picked up her laser pointer. He turned to a bar graph still displayed. These productivity figures, he said, do not match your reported power consumption from the manufacturing plant in Dayton. Output is down, yet costs have increased. That is not scaling. That is mismanagement. Clara Reynolds, the junior executive, now looked openly rattled. Dalton snapped. That data is internal. How? Julian turned back, handing the laser pointer to Madeline with a kind expression. You invited a consultant. You did not think he would actually consult. No one laughed. Madeline clenched her jaw. Something about his tone, it was too steady, too quiet, too dangerous to eye in her world. Power was loud, assertive, ruthless, but Julian Hayes was calm, patient, surgical, and that made him terrifying. As she stared across the table, trying to reassemble her authority, Julian's phone vibrated once more. He finally glanced at the screen. A short message from Marcus. All aligned. Phase 2 in position. Waiting for your word. Julian slid the phone into his pocket without a word. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened anyone. But slowly, methodically, he had turned the room into a storm no one could stop. And the eye of that storm was standing right in front of them. Julian glanced at his phone. A single word blinked on the screen. Now. He tapped it once and set the phone down gently on the table. Inside the boardroom, no one knew what had just been set in motion. But across the city and across the country, the storm had already begun. In newsrooms from New York to Chicago, a 43-minute audio file landed in inboxes. It carried every word Madeline Pierce had spoken in that room. Every insult, every condescending remark, every phrase soaked in arrogance. I do not shake hands with employees. People like me have important schedules. It's just reality. Someone like you. Within minutes, clips were edited, captions added, tweets composed, hashtags exploded across the internet. Hashtag Hayes exposed them, hashtag Madeline Pierce, hashtag someone like you. The audio went viral. News anchors paused broadcasts to address the leak. Civil rights groups shared the file. Investors began to call. Clients began to pull out. Back inside the boardroom, Madeline's phone rang. She ignored it. Then it rang again, and again, and again. She finally picked it up. "Madeline, what the hell is going on?" barked a voice on speaker. It was Peter Langford, the chairman of Ashton and Pierce's largest stakeholder. "We just heard a recording of you mocking a financial analyst." "That voice is yours, is it not?" Madeline froze. "Peter, I have no idea how this." "Save it," he snapped. "You better fix this in the next 5 minutes, or we will make a statement ourselves." Madeline hung up, her hand shaking. She turned slowly toward Julian. "What did you do?" she asked, voice brittle. Julian did not flinch. He leaned forward slightly, resting both palms on the polished table. "I gave the world a chance to hear how your company treats people who do not fit your mold," he said quietly. The room was dead silent. The executives around her looked stunned. James Dalton wiped sweat from his brow. Clara stared at the table, pale. "You had no right to record us," Madeline hissed. "In this state," Julian replied calmly. "Only one party needs to consent." "I did." She stepped back, hands trembling. This will destroy us." Julian studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he stood. He adjusted his jacket slowly, looked every executive in the eye, then spoke, clearly and without emotion. "There is no outside consultant." The words hung in the air like broken glass. Madeline blinked. "What?" Julian took a gold card from his pocket and placed it gently on the table. "I am Julian Hayes, founder and CEO of Hayes Capital." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Madeline stumbled back a step, her eyes darting between the card and his face. You're, "Yes," Julian said, voice steady. "The man your team made wait in the lobby. The man your security watched like a threat. The man you refused to shake hands with." Clara gasped. Dalton's jaw clenched. "I have spent the last 6 months evaluating Ashton and Pierce for a $3.80 billion investment," Julian continued. This meeting was the final test. Madeline fell into her chair, as if someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Julian looked around the boardroom, at the walls lined with fake prestige, the faces once full of smug pride now stained with panic. "I wanted to see," he said, "how your company treats people when you think they have no power." Now we all know the answer. Outside, a crowd had started to form. Reporters were gathering near the entrance. Microphones were ready, and inside, the truth had finally arrived. The mask had fallen. The empire had cracked, and at the center of it all stood a man who never raised his voice, never lost his patience, but changed everything with the power of truth. 6 months had passed. Outside, Manhattan's skyline shimmered under the late afternoon sun. But from the 54th floor of the Hayes Capitol building, the city looked different. Like a canvas Julian Hayes had finally begun to paint on his own terms. He stood by the window in his new office, hands behind his back, reflecting in silence. Behind him, the room buzzed with quiet energy, analysts on calls, assistants walking with purpose, a sense of momentum that only came from clarity of vision. A framed photo on the wall caught his eye. His team. Dozens of brilliant minds, Black, Latino, Asian, white. Each one hired not for appearance, but for brilliance. Each one a silent answer to the question Ashton and Pierce had asked with every sneer and every sidelong glance. Julian had not just won. He had redefined what winning looked like. The fall of Ashton and Pierce had been swift. Within 72 hours of the audio leak, 5 major clients had pulled contracts. Civil rights organizations issued public condemnations. Shareholders called for Madeline Pierce's resignation. 2 weeks later, the company's stock had dropped 47%. By the end of the 3rd month, bankruptcy papers were filed in silence. Madeline Pierce lost everything: the penthouse in Soho, the vintage art collection, the reputation that had once opened doors in every corner of corporate America. Gone. She moved in with her older sister in a quiet part of upstate New York, avoiding reporters and the internet alike. Her name was now more associated with arrogance and downfall than leadership. Julian never gloated. He had never set out to destroy her. He had set out to build something better, and he did. Hayes Capital became more than an investment firm. It became a symbol, a global benchmark for ethical investing, a force that demanded transparency, fairness, and dignity as preconditions for profit. His inclusion-first protocol, once mocked by competitors, was now being adopted by firms. In over 30 countries, Japan, Brazil, South Africa, Germany, entire boards had been restructured to meet the new standards. Universities reached out weekly. Columbia, Stanford, Oxford, business ethics departments invited him to speak on the future of leadership. He declined most offers, choosing instead to build a mentorship program for young minority entrepreneurs, the very people once overlooked by institutions like Ashton and Pierce. One morning, his chief of staff, Marcus, entered the office with an update. "You might want to see this," he said, handing Julian a tablet. It was an op-ed from the Financial Times, titled, "Julian Hayes, the man who made Wall Street confront its soul." Julian read it without expression. Then he set it down, gently, and returned to the window. He was not interested in headlines. Not even legacy. He was interested in change. True change. Marcus joined him at the glass, both men gazing at the sprawling city below. "Do you think they'll remember what happened?" Marcus asked. Julian nodded slowly. "Not just the fall," he said. "They'll remember what rose after it. That was the real legacy, not the bankruptcy, not the scandal, but the quiet revolution that began in a room where no one had shaken his hand and ended in a world where no one would dare ignore someone like him again." The conference room was smaller than usual, but the energy inside was electric. Julian stood near the table, surrounded by young entrepreneurs, brilliant, bold, full of fire. There were no boardroom games here, no layers of ego, just raw ambition and the hunger to create something meaningful. Across from him, a 24-year-old Latino woman named Elena held a sleek pitch deck in her hands. Her voice trembled, not from nerves, but from disbelief. "I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Hayes," she said. "You were the first to believe in my idea. That investment changed everything. We just closed our second funding round, and we're already valued at $3 million. Julian smiled softly, not the polished smile from magazine covers. The real one. The smile of someone who remembered exactly how it felt to be passed over, questioned, underestimated. 6 years ago, he had been in her place, sitting across from people who saw only his skin, not his mind. His zip code, not his vision. Now, here he stood, no longer knocking on doors, but holding them open for others. As the young founders left the room, energized and hopeful, Marcus approached with a tablet in hand. "Forbes wants to put you on the cover," he said. "Special issue on ethical leadership. Title would be, 'The Man Who Rebuilt the Rules.'" Julian glanced at the screen, then gently pushed it aside. "This was never about me," he replied as he walked over to the window, looking out at the city that had once tried to write his limits. Now, every office tower held the potential for change. Every street echoed with stories just waiting for their moment. Julian knew he had already claimed his victory, not through anger or revenge, but through vision and impact. Because in the end, the best revenge is building something so extraordinary, they become irrelevant.